Good afternoon, everyone. We are continuing our study in the book of Numbers in chapter 35, and we are coming to a close of this book. Today, we are covering a chapter with regards to the city of refuge, which I suppose many of us would not read very much, but it has very important significance, especially towards knowing more about God and why he did what he did. And so now in chapter 35 are some very important words that were communicated through Moses to the children of Israel. As you can see, once that is being said, you know that these are very serious words that they have to pay attention to. So let's begin. Chapter 35, the Lord, and this would be Jehovah. Every time you're seeing this pattern, he speaks to Moses, and the location is what we call the plains of Moab. These are the area which is on the eastern shore of the Jordan, and it's really flat. And that's where you can actually accommodate a couple of million people sitting there with children and animals. And it says here that they were there at the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Now, notice the word across from is supplied by the translators, but it is implied it is by the plains of Moab, by the Jordan, right? And then it says here, uh, by the Jordan uh, and Jericho. And so Jericho, and when we know the location, it's really directly across the Jordan. And so they are on this side of the Jordan. And God says to them, to Moses, to tell the children of Israel, command. Now, this word command is really order. Give an order, not say to them or tell them. It is to charge them, which means that this is something that they must do to the sons of Israel. And you notice we seldom see the translator use the word sons, but this literally means sons of Israel, that they give the Levites cities to dwell from within the inheritance of their possession. And you shall also give the Levites common land around the cities. Now, there are a couple of things here. First of all, understand that the Levites are not part of the ones who have an inheritance of their possession. Whatever eventually they are going to gain from the territory, they are to inherit and pass it down generation to generation. But the Levites have no part of it. And God says here, these people who have gained an inheritance to give cities to dwell. The cities are given to the Levites, and there is also the common land around the cities. So there are places for them to live in, and there are places for them to cultivate and to take care of their animals. Now, these are things which we seldom talk about because the Levites have no inheritance of any possession. But it is to command those that have the inheritance and possession to do this. It is to take care of the Levites. Now, understand the Levites are also the ones who takes care of the tabernacle. But as they grow in numbers, they find that you don't need everyone to be at the tabernacle. And those who are not actively in service at that point in time, and they may have a roster, which we learn, um, they will go back to the cities and they will live there, wherever these cities are. There are 40 over of them, and we will read about them shortly. And so they shall have the cities to dwell in, their common land for their cattle, for their herds, for all their animals. And the common land of the cities which you will give the Levites shall extend from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits all around. Now, 1,000 cubits is, well, let's say if a cubit is about, say, 17 inches, right? It's about 17 inches. Um, we're talking about, let's say, a cubit is 17 inches. We are talking about 17,000 cubits. 17,000 cubits would be about 1,500 feet. So let's say this is about 1,500 feet to round it up, right? 1,500 feet, which is about, for our purposes, 500 meters. And so these are the commands that's been given to the Israelites who had land to do this. Now, right now it's just an instruction and details will follow. He says, then you shall measure outside the city on the east side 2,000 cubits, on the south side 2,000 cubits, west side 2,000 cubits, north side 2,000 cubits. The city shall be in the middle, and this shall belong to them as common land for the cities. So what does that mean? As you can see, there is a common land of the cities to be given to the Levites right here, 1,000 cubits all around, and then you measure outside the city 2,000. And so what you find in the explanation is this: we have the city for the Levites to live in, and around the city we have 1,000 cubits, all right? 1,000 cubits or 500 meters of common land, right? For the animals. And then we read that they are to measure 2,000 cubits all around. And these are also part of the common land. And this is 2,000 cubits. And that would be about 1,000 meters, right? 1,000 meters. And what we do read then would be that in this vicinity of the first 1,000, it is meant for the animals. And then the next 1,000 would be a common land that is to be a separation between them of the city limits to the outside. And so they could actually use that place from the city walls. And notice the measurement is from the city walls outside. And so it is important for us, I guess, you could find that this would be for the fields. I think you could use this for the fields. And this would be for the animals. And so they could have agriculture here. They have vineyards and whatever plants they have. And animals have this 1,000 cubit, right? About 500 meters. Now, one of the things that we find is that they are all measured from the city walls. No matter how large or how small the city is, there are walls. These are walled cities. Now, just a brief mention about walled cities. In the contrast is that while they are in the wilderness, as they are right now, they have camps of tents. And camp of tents means that they are very mobile, they are wandering, and they are moving around, and hence they are in camps of tents. The contrast when they enter and possess the land is that they will have walled cities. And walled cities would mean houses inside, And that would mean that they are no longer wandering. They are in a fixed location. So please bear in mind the contrast when we talk about the city with walls and versus their wandering days in the wilderness, which is in the book of Numbers, where we are in chapter 35. And this is speaking about the future. And there are two parts, and you need to always remember there are two parts of the land that is given to the children of Israel. One is the northern part after Ammon on the eastern shore, where they conquered Sihon and King Og. And then there is the eventual western shore of the Jordan, where we would read in the book of Joshua, where they would go in and take the land. We are talking about locations in both areas. Verse 6. Now, among the cities which you shall give to the Levites, they haven't given yet, but they will. There will be 6 cities of refuge. And this is important for us, and we'll talk more about this. 6 cities of refuge. Now, what does this mean? Now, the cities of refuge is a town for asylum. Asylum. Now, in today's language, when we talk about asylum, it really means to hide, I guess you could say to hide from danger. I guess we could say that, right? To danger. And so asylum today would be when somebody feels that they are being persecuted for whatever reason, they go to the embassy of the target country and seek for asylum. Now, the meaning of that means that you are seeking refuge in that state. And so that they will give you protection and you can hide from your enemies, hide from the ones who is endangering you. That is what it means by refuge, even in the Hebrew. And there are 6 of these cities, and God says, to which a manslayer may flee. Now, I guess you need to understand the word manslayer. This would be, I guess, in our modern day terms, for our purposes today, is not a murderer. This would be a manslaughter. Manslaughter, and it is unintentional. Okay? Unintentional manslaughter. And this is the context. The word just merely means killing. Somebody who is killing, and they may flee. They may flee means they may run to escape the danger. And so this is for a man who has killed somebody. I think we can use that, but I'm just giving you the context. This is not your common criminal, but eventually you'd see that we're referring to someone who has intentionally killed another person. So the word really means about killing another person. It says, and these you shall add 42 cities. So how many cities are we talking about? We are talking about giving the Levites 48 cities, 42 plus 6 cities of refuge, which means that the cities of refuge will also be lived in by the Levites, who will take care of the ones who are seeking asylum. And so these you shall give with their common land, which is 2,000 cubits, which is about 1 kilometer radius that surrounds the city. And the cities which you shall give shall be from the possession of the children of Israel. From the larger tribe you give more, smaller tribe you shall give less. Each shall give some of its cities to the Levites in proportion to the inheritance which they get. Now, this is important here. is that we now understand that God is fair. And God is fair in the sense that God will require those with larger territories to give more, right? And those with smaller territories to give less. Because God told them to allocate land according to the number of head count in their tribes. And not all tribes are of the same head count. And so God says, when you have more head count, you need more land. When you have less head count, you need less land. And so when you have less land, you only need to give fewer cities. That's what it means here in verse 6, 7, and 8. God is fair. God doesn't demand the same from everyone because not everyone has the same. Not everyone is in the same situation. And so God is fair and just from seeing how he deals with these issues. Let's talk about the cities of refuge. It says the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the children of Israel. Now this is what you tell them. When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, which means they have not crossed yet, right? But when you do, only then shall you appoint the cities to be cities of refuge for you." Which means this: the cities of refuge are appointed only after you have gotten the land of Canaan, not before. That the manslayer who kills any person, note this word, accidentally, may flee there. The word flee is to escape. Accidentally, this is in verse 11, and the word accidentally, how would you say? The man, and this word is shagaga. Shagaga means, as you can see in the book of Leviticus, you can also see this word. This means that it's done unaware, right? Unintentionally. What else can you say? A mistake. Yep, you can say that. It's a mistake. So they can run there. So it is not just any manslayer. It is someone who killed another unintentionally or accidentally or mistakenly or unaware with no definite intention. It is only for those conditions. They shall be cities of refuge for you from the avenger. Why? Because the one who was killed, their next of kin, the kinsmen, will seek vengeance, won't they? In this case, if they are able to seek refuge from these cities, then this manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation in judgment to pass whether he should or should not, according to the crime that he has committed. Of the cities you give, you shall have 6 cities of refuge. Now, this is important. Look at this. You shall appoint 3 cities on the side of this Jordan, which is where they are, 3 cities in the land of Canaan, which will be cities of refuge. Now, this is the interesting pieces of information. You see, in the land of Canaan, that would be a much larger piece of land than this side of the Jordan. This side of the Jordan is probably just north of Ammon, all the way up to a slightly north of the Galilee. Not a large piece of land, but it's been allocated to 2.5 tribes. And so if you look at it from the proportion of the cities of refuge, it doesn't seem to be even. For the cities that were given to the Levites, God says he will be fair. When you've got more land, you give more cities. But in this case, the city of refuge is not about fairness. The cities of refuge is actually allocated with reference to the potential crime that might be committed. And so when we read in Hosea chapter 6, verse 8, for example, Hosea chapter 6, verse 8, we always find that Gilead is seen to be a city of workers of violence who kills. And so on this side where Gilead is, Gilead and Northern has three cities. And so they have a higher need on that side because they have more people who have a tendency to commit crime. And in the other three in the land of Canaan, it would be spread out in a large piece of land, and that would be deemed sufficient. These cities shall be for refuge for the children of Israel. That's one. For the stranger. Now, in verse 15, the word stranger here would be the ger, right? Would be the ger. And the third one here for the sojourner among them, these will be the temporary visitors, people who pass by, people who are not there as a citizen who don't plan to stay there for very long. And so for all three, it could be that one of them could accidentally kill another. And so by the Torah that's given to them, that if it is unintentional, any one of these people can run to the city of refuge for escape, right? If anyone who kills a person accidentally. So remember, it is not for intentional killing, but it's meant for unintentional or accidental killing. Now think with me. God is fair. God does not treat every killing as the same. And here, from verse 16 onwards, God now describes what would be considered intentional and what would be considered unintentional. God does not leave for man to guess or does not leave for man to invent their own. Of course, they have to judge the person, but for all intents and purposes, God explains the principles behind what is accidental and what is intentional. Verse 16, if he strikes him with an iron weapon and he dies, he is a murderer. Right? This is important. There is no two way about it. This murderer shall surely be put to death. Remember, he strikes with intent that he dies and put to death, a life for a life. If he strikes him with a stone in hand, by which one could die, which means it's not a pebble, it's a big rock, and he does die, he is a murderer. He shall be put to death. You see, all of this is consistent. You have intentionally killed, you die. If he strikes him with a wooden hand weapon, which one could die from, and he does die, he is a murderer and shall be put to death. See, it's very clear. You intentionally killed using something that can kill, and he dies, you're a murderer. The avenger of blood, let me just use a different color. The avenger of blood. Now, verse 19, the one who redeems the blood. The avenger of blood means that this is one who redeems. This is a kinsman. Like a kinsman redeemer, this is a kinsman who would redeem the blood, right? The blood of himself shall be put the murderer to death. So the kinsman of the one who's been killed is given the authority to execute the murderer. All right. So when he meets him, he shall put him to death. Now, in verse 20, that is also another condition. If he pushes him out of hatred while lying in wait, or hurls something at him so that he dies, or in enmity strikes him with his hand so that he dies, the one who struck him shall surely be put to death. He is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death where he meets him. Now, let me explain this a little bit more. Take a look at these words. The idea here is out of hatred, which means that there is an emotional feeling, not just merely lack of love, but with a hateful emotion that would lash out at that person. And so he pushes him. Now, the other one is lie in wait. The word lying in wait tells us that this is intentional. So let me just write this down. Out of hatred is intentional. Lying in wait is intentional. I just want you to see the category, right? In enmity is intentional. When you see your enemy, you will strike him. All right. And so when you do that and he dies, he shall be surely be put to death. He is a murderer. And the avenger of blood of the one who dies can execute this person. All right. So all of these tells us that God is concerned with, right, with the state of mind. With the state of mind of the one who is doing the killing. Is he doing the killing with intent? That is the whole question here. The whole question of 16 to 21, this whole thing here in question is that God is asking, what is his state of mind? If his state of mind is with the intent of killing, then he is a murderer if that person dies. Now in verse 22, it says, if he pushes him suddenly without enmity. Now, these words we need to pay a bit of attention. Pushes him suddenly, all of a sudden, in haste. Right? In haste. And it says that there is no enmity. No enmity means no hatred. And then he throws anything at him without lying in wait, meaning he's not waiting to kill him. All right. Or uses a stone by which a man could die, and he throws it at him without seeing him. So it was unaware. So it's not intentional. You can see that. And if that person dies while he was not in his enemy or seeking his harm, then the congregation shall judge between the manslayer and the avenger of blood according to these judgments. Who is the avenger of blood? The kinsman, right? The kinsman of the one who died. And so what does it say here? What is the state of mind? The state of mind of the person like this is called unintentional, right? Unintentional. He had no intent. He was not purposefully trying to kill him. It was accidental. He was running and happened to push him, and he kind of lost his balance. He fell and he hit his head and he died. It is unintentional. So they are to judge the state of mind of the person, of the manslayer. So the congregation shall deliver the manslayer of the avenger of blood, and the congregation shall return him to the city of refuge. And so there is a life taken, albeit accidental. And so he is kept in a prison. The prison is called the city of refuge, where he will have to flee. And the executor of him would be the one kinsman of the one who he accidentally killed. And he will remain there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. Now, understand this, that it is until the death, the end of the high priest. This is HaKohen HaGadol, the high priest, who is there at the time when he committed the crime. And he was the one who was anointed to be the high priest. And then he dies. And if he dies, then he would be set free. So that would be the I guess the tenure of his incarceration. But if the manslayer at any time goes outside the limits of the city of refuge where he fled, goes outside the limits, in verse 26, talks about the boundary. Now, what is the boundary of the city of refuge? The boundary of the city of refuge, I guess you could say of it as the city walls, right? The limits here would be the boundaries, right? The boundaries. However, that the city of refuge are also the cities given to the Levites, and they have a 2,000 cubits of common space. That could also be understood as the boundaries of the city of refuge, which are also the cities of the Levites. And the avenger of blood finds him outside the limits of the city of refuge. The avenger of blood kills the manslayer. He shall not be guilty of murder, because he should have remained in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to the land of his possession. So the tenure of his incarceration would be for the duration of the lifespan or the remaining lifespan of the high priest. And after that, then he will be released from his crime. Verse 29. Now, the verse 29 is to tell us that these things shall be a statute of judgment to you throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Now, let me just break this down a little bit. A statute means an ordinance, an enactment. It is like a law, and it is for justice. Why did God give them the law? It is to enact justice within the nation of Israel. You see, they are a new nation. They are formed in Exodus 19 when God says, "You are my holy people," a royal priesthood, a holy nation. They are special because the nation is governed by the Torah. The nation is governed by the rules and directions of God given to them for the purpose of being special, being different from every other nation around them. And those rules or laws, you may want to call them, are for justice within that community, not only for rituals, but also to govern how they ought to live amongst themselves. And God says, this is how you should do it within your dwellings. Now, I guess we should also realize when it says these, would be that as long as Israel is not in the land, then this statute does not apply because there is no city of refuge. But when the whole nation comes back into the land, then they are to implement the city of refuge. Now, since 70 AD or since 135 AD or CE, after Emperor Hadrian destroyed Jerusalem and renamed it and permanently wanted to wipe off the memory of the Jews and burn all their books, there was no land for Israel until 1948. And some of them came back. The southern nation came back, but not the northern nations, or most of their tribes did not come back. And so they are of the opinion that this particular chapter, the city of refuge and the cities given to the Levites, are not applicable while they are in exile. And the present day state of Israel has not implemented this because they don't consider themselves as part of the inheritance. It's just a political nation at this point in time, and a minority or a remnant of them are only religious. The rest of them are not. Now, carrying on into verse 30, it says, whoever kills a person, understand this, whoever strikes, this is to strike to kill. Strike to kill. Like Cain struck to kill Abel. All right. It says here the murderer, the one who strikes to kill a person, is called a murderer, a manslayer. He should be put to death on the testimony of witnesses. Note, but one witness is not a testimony against a person for the death penalty. Why? Because it should be in the mouth of 2 or 3 to establish this, which tells them that they cannot simply execute a person. And that was why all these years after 135, in the Jews, wherever they have been, they have never really executed anyone, because they feel that to take a life, even the life of a manslayer or a murderer, has to be at the highest standard of evidence and witness. And so they rather err on the conservative rather than err on the optimistic and killing a wrong person. That's their concern. Right? That's a concern. In verse 31, moreover, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death. Note, he shall be surely be put to death. Now, what does this mean? You shall not take a ransom. A ransom here means you should call a redemption price. A redemption price. What is a redemption price? It means that the kinsman who is to avenge the death of the one who died cannot say, well, if you give me 40 cows, I will spare your life. That is what it means by a ransom for the life of a murderer. Nothing shall be used to redeem his life because he is guilty of death. He must be put to death. So the law of God is justice. When a person intentionally kills another, then it is a life for a life, and there is no refuge and no ransom. No one to take his place. No one can pay the price to take the place. No one can use animal or whatever to take the place. The person who is guilty must die. That is what it means by the law of God. The law of God cannot be modified. It cannot be changed because the principle of the law of God is justice. Because you have taken a life, you have taken the blood of another. intentionally, and hence he, if judged correctly and justly, he must die. That is what it means that no ransom for the life. All right. Now, if there is a person who have fled to the city of refuge, you shall take no ransom as well, that he may dwell in the land before the death of the priest. Meaning, if there was an accidental death and this person runs to the city of refuge, he cannot say, hey, I don't want to wait until the death of the priest, of the high priest, too long. Can I give you 10 shekels of gold? And the answer is no. And so the principle here is this: you shall not pollute the land where you are, for the blood defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. Let's break this down. You see, God says in verse 33, you shall not pollute the land or cause the land to be defiled, to be godless. Now, this is a very interesting word. The word pollute here is to cause the land to be godless. What does that mean? It means that when God has given his law of justice, it needs to be executed. But if the law of justice given by God is not executed, then God says that is a pollution. You have defiled the land and you have made the land as if there was no God. You disregarded the law of justice. That is what it means. For blood defiles the land. What do you mean blood defiles the land? It means that when somebody is killed, then somebody has taken the life of another and has dripped the blood of another. And blood symbolizes blood. Uh, and you find that when that is done, when somebody has killed another and blood has been spilled, then in verse 33 says that there is no covering. Atonement here is covering. No atonement to be made for the land, for the blood that is shed on it can only be covered by the blood of him who shed it. Now, this is a principle. Just look at this. This is a principle. A person who is killed is said to have his blood shed. And the blood that is shed can only be neutralized. And so the covering here is about an idea of neutralizing. Neutralizing by atonement. And atonement means covering. And so if we have an innocent die, then to neutralize it will be the blood of the murderer. And then it will be okay in God's mind. If you let this go, then it is pollution. It is defiling. You're treating the land as if there is no God. You are ignoring the law of God. It is that serious, really. It's that serious. And so to neutralize the shedding of blood of the innocent, you need to shed the blood of the one who killed him. And thereby, this makes it justice. You cannot say, well, you can pay 40 shekels of gold, or you can say, I'll take 2 oxen. Nothing shall replace the man, because in God's eyes, it is a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. Except for that instance where the murderer or the one who killed or shed blood of another person has done it unintentionally. And by that, he can run to the city of refuge to be incarcerated or waited out until the death of the of the high priest. That's the only two instances. So, what do we learn about God today? You learn that God is fair. God looks at the state of mind of the person who has committed the crime or has sinned. And if the state of mind of the person was unintentional, there was no intent, no enmity, not waiting, there was no cause for him to do that, and it was unknowing and it was unwitting, it was unintentional, it was accidental, then that person doesn't have to die. In God's mind, that person was not a murderer intentionally killing. Yes, he has taken a life and he cannot live freely. He then has to be sent to the city of refuge to stay there in what we today call incarceration. He is not permitted to go away from the city limits, because if he does, he can be killed by the kinsman. And so he stays there until the death of the high priest, and then he can go home free. But the state of the person who lies in wait, who has enmity, who hates the other person, takes up a weapon, kills the other person, yes, he has shed blood and he is called a murderer. A one who is killing, one who is murdered another intentionally. And so the 10 commandments that we read says, thou shalt not murder, has a penalty, and the penalty is a life for a life. And so here in verses 33 to 34, we read that God expects the atonement would be the blood of the one who shed the blood. That it's all. It's a life for a life, and it cannot be a representative life. You cannot have the son of this person taking the place. You cannot have his servant dying for him. In God's law of justice, as he has described in chapter 35, the one who sheds blood must be the one who dies for it, because that would be justice. Therefore, do not cause the land to be godless, which you live in there, in the midst which I dwell. God is dwelling there. For I, the Lord, dwells among the children of Israel. The word amongst here is in the midst. God is staying there. Respect the presence of God. Do not cause anyone to think that the land is godless. I think you could say this. Godless. If it is godless, then it is lawless. Why is it equated to lawlessness? Because God gave the law. And if the law is not obeyed, then you're treating the law as nothing, and you're treating God as nothing. And you are lawless because you would then do whatever you want. And so God says here, you are staying the land. It's my land. I've given it to you. I've given you the law of justice. Do not treat this land as there is no God, and therefore no law. And hence, remember that I am in your midst. I am in the midst of the sons of Israel, and obey God by the rules of justice. And so with this, we come to the end of our chapter this afternoon.